Welcome to Toys in the Hood. This is our part 2 of our episode looking at the Space Marine Primarchs, the origins of their names and how those names have reflected in the history of the chapter. First up, we're looking at Konrad Kurtz of the Night Lords. So Konrad Kurtz gets his name from Kurtz, who is a character in Joseph Conrad's book Heart of Darkness. Now, this isn't the first time that Joseph Conrad has influenced some science fiction names. His book Nostromo gives us the name of the ship from Alien, and a few of the other kind of names from Alien are from his books as well. But anyway, so Heart of Darkness was subsequently made into a film, or was the inspiration for the film Apocalypse Now. In Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando plays Colonel Kurtz. Now, Colonel Kurtz launches a campaign of terror in Vietnam, very much like how the Night Lords fight, and then is assassinated by Martin Sheen's character. Now, our Konrad Kurtz is also assassinated, and he's assassinated by a Calidus assassin. Now, that Calidus assassin is called M. Shen, which is clearly a tribute to Martin Sheen. And both Colonel Kurtz and both Konrad Kurtz, they welcome their killer. So our second chapter today are the Blood Angels and Sanguinius. So Sanguinius gets his name from Sanguineous, which is Latin for blood. So it's pretty straightforward there. It also gives us the word sanguine, which means to be cheerful or optimistic, which I think is pretty ironic when you think that most of the Blood Angels are basically emo kids who are going to eventually succumb to the Black Rage. Now, Sanguinius also has wings, so he is quite literally an angel of blood, or, a blood angel. And let's also not forget at this point that the Adeptus Astartes are also known as the Angels of Death. Now, Sanguinius wields the blade in carmine. Now, in carmine means to turn red or cover in blood. And then carmine itself, it might be carmine, is a pigment that's made from crushed insects. So next we have Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands. This meaning is very literal. Ferris is Latin for iron, Manus is Latin for hand. Now, it's quite cool if you remember, so we had Rogel Dawn, who is the royal fist. So we have the royal fist of the imperial fists, and then we have the iron hand of the iron hand. It would have made a really cool face-off, except they're both loyalists. Then we have Angron of the World Eaters, which is clearly, it's made up from the word angry, which pretty much describes Angron and all of the other World Eaters. There's a medieval javelin called an Angron, but I think that's a pretty obscure reference. But then again, a lot of the Games Workshop writers, especially in the 80s, they'd started out as historical gamers, so it's possible that that influenced them. I've also heard the story that in the 80s there was a member of, it's either a member of Games Workshop staff or it was a chap down the local pub who was called Ron and was very angry. But just because you want something to be true doesn't really mean it is. Right, so now we've got Robert Guilleman of the Ultramarines. So Robert Charles Guilleman was a Boston-based street artist, also known as Sidewalk Sam. And he was famous for basically using acrylic paints in his art, which just kind of seems really obscure. But Rogue Trader did come out in the mid-80s, which was the same time that kind of Robert was at his peak, really, of his career. And the Ultramarines are basically just named after a colour. So I was really, really pleased with this explanation, and I gleefully explained it to Rick Priestley many years ago. And it turned out I'm really, really wrong. He actually made a name that he thought sounded like a West Indian revolutionary in some French colony, which is very different from the Guilleman that we've kind of come to know and love. So Ultramarine means beyond the sea, which doesn't seem that relevant, but then the marine armour is blue, as in the colour. Ultramarine was also a dye, which makes this the third mention of dyes in this series, after Fulgrim's purple dye and the origins of the word in carmine. We have Mortarion of the Death Guard. Now, Mortarion comes from the Latin mors, meaning death, or in French it's mort, which kind of makes me think of Terry Pratchett's Mort, which was released in 1987. So that could be around about the same time as Mortarion was established. But that said, I think Terry Pratchett's version of death is maybe a little bit more fun. And with his gaunt appearance and his scythe, then Mortarion does look just like the Grim Reaper. And let's not forget that the Grim Reaper is an angel of death, as are the Space Marines. He doesn't look much like the Grim Reaper now. With the current model, he looks more Harvester Restaurant than Harvester of Souls. But if you take a look at his old Epic model, then you can see he's very, very inspired by the Grim Reaper. Thanks for listening. This was a bit quicker than part 1, which if you missed, you can find it on the channel. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 3, where we'll look at the last 6 Primarchs, including the War Master himself. Thank you very much for your time.